Yeah.
Awesome.
Well,
Okay.
we're recording it. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's wait for this sound.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, yeah, it's recording. So.
Hello, welcome to Creative Manitoba's webinar series, Arts Admin 101, designed by and for arts administrators. I'm your host, Carol Finlay, Education Director at Creative Manitoba. Next to me is Chantel Mierau, Finance and Administration Manager at ACE Art and co-chair of the Manitoba Artist Run Center Coalition. Today's topic is Excel tools for reporting to arts funders. And I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Carol. The main thing we're going to do, we're not going to talk specifically about specific platforms or categories that funders might ask you to report to, but we are going to get some nitty-gritty Excel tools that will help you customize whatever bookkeeping reports you receive or Excel spreadsheets that you keep, to customize those to get the correct numbers to funders, allow you to add things up and report them in a way that your funders want to see them. Basically, what I'm going to start off with is just arranging or moving things, copying and pasting, and selecting cells. Feel free to stop me at any time if you have questions. And Carol has a mic. If we'd like to capture it in the recording, so she'll bring you a mic if you have a question. Yeah. So basically, one important thing to remember about Excel is that you can kind of think of it as a skyscraper, your spreadsheet. So, and they have floors and then the columns. If you're going to move something and you want a whole row to stay together, the best thing to always do is to click on the little number beside at the side for a row. That will always select all for your row, and clicking on a column letter will select all for a column. So you'll never have to worry about, did I highlight all the way to the bottom? Say you want to move this year-to-date column to the end. You can click on the C, right-click, cut, and then click where you want it, and paste or insert, usually insert. So that's something really basic just to start off with. It'll really help to make sure you don't move half of your data and leave half of it behind, or it's really easy to overwrite columns and data. So for example, if I cut this column again, and if I hit paste, you know what? I'm not even sure if I hit paste, it'll overwrite it. So we want to insert those cut cells. So that's just a little tip. Yeah, just to start off with, something to be aware of. The next thing, yeah. So this spreadsheet is pretty disorganized and not really that reflective of maybe most budgets, but it just has some basic categories because we can move some things around, and we're going to sort some things. So, so that being done, let's say we want to sort a category by alphabetical order. Now, if I were to try to sort this whole document right now, it's going to sort my headings and totals along with all the items in between. So this is this little triangle in the corner is the select all. And if I go into data, and if I just hit sort A to Z, it's going to take the first column, column A, and just sort everything alphabetical order. And that's not what I want to do. Now I've got my headings all over the place, and it's just a mess. So I'm going to just Control Z, undo that. So in order to sort a category, what I want to do is highlight just the items that I want to sort. Again, using the numbers at the beginning of the row, so to make sure I don't miss highlighting anything. And then you go into data. It may look different if you're using a Mac, but data. And if you're just wanting to sort by the first column, you can just hit sort and sort by column A to Z. And that'll automatically just rearrange all those numbers into that order. Now you'll notice I'm gonna start talking about formulas now, and it may be a bit of a jump forward, but feel free to, we can jump back. So the most common formula you're going to see is something that looks like this. Equals sum, and then it'll have a range in it. So basically that's just means it's adding up everything between C3 and C5. So in column C, it's got adding up 3, 4, and 5. And if you click in, there's this little toolbar at the top, which I've already, I'll just do that again here. So this is the cell that contains the formula, C6. If I look up into this formula builder field and click inside it, you'll notice it shows up a border of what it's adding up. So that's a great way to see immediately what is happening in your spreadsheet. It's a great way of finding errors, to check to make sure things are adding up correctly. However, once we've clicked inside of this toolbar to show that highlighted area, if I click on another cell, it's going to actually add it into that. So, or maybe it didn't in this version, actually. Let me just try that again. Okay, so that's a difference between the Mac version and the Windows version, is that in the Mac version, you can actually mess yourself up quite a bit by clicking into this formula builder and then clicking on other cells. You'll see it adding in reference numbers as you go. That's really handy that it doesn't do that in Windows.
Some Windows versions do that.
Some, okay, so that's not consistent. I've seen, yeah, that I have less experience with the Windows version, but you've experienced that? Okay. So a great way to avoid that is once you've clicked in this formula builder, once you're done looking at it, just hit the escape button and that will get you out of there. Or if you're finished typing in it, hit enter. Also, if you make any changes in this field that you don't want to see, you can also hit escape and it will basically, it won't save what you just typed. It's a great way of if you ever have any like hair pulling moments with working with formulas, that's a great way to immediately get back to to reverse those changes and make sure that your formulas stay correct. So some of the most common formulas that you're going to work with are ones with numerals, with cell references, and with cell ranges. So we talked, the example that was up on the spreadsheet was one with a cell range. You can also just use it as a calculator. So as soon as you hit an equals in the cell, it will understand that you're using a formula, and it's all automatically going to go into formula mode. And if it can't understand what you're doing, it's going to give you error messages. It is a little bit picky about how it wants to see things spelled and what it will and will not accept, but it's just a matter of getting the spelling right so that Excel will accept it. So with numerals, you can add an addition sign between any number of numbers, and subtract is the dash. Now, if you have a keyboard that has the number pad on the side, you'll be familiar with the asterisk as a multiplication and the slash as a division sign. But if you're not familiar with this, and you're looking for multiply and divide on your computer, that's what they are. You can also use brackets to indicate to Excel an order of operations. So you want to do 3 minus 1 first and then divide by 2. You can enter that into Excel and it will automatically calculate that for you. So it'll just save you an extra step of pulling out your calculator and doing that calculation. It's also really handy if there's a little bit of extra information that you want to capture in a spreadsheet that you're working on. If you've got two, say we'll use ACI as an example, or Creative Manitoba as an example. If you got, say, you partnered with Creative Manitoba twice, and there were 2 chunks of money, and one was 600 and one was 300. If you enter and you want to kind of remember, like, oh, but what was that 900 about? You can enter equals 600 plus 300. So let's just do that here. So we'll type in equals 600 plus 300. And when we hit enter, it'll add it up. But if we're trying to jog our memories, we can click on that again and see what the individual amounts were for. So this is helpful if you're working in Excel internally, creating a budget, or it might be helpful with, say, with artist fees, to remember how many artists you're paying. Say you could do equals 2,000 times 3, and next time you go to click on that amount, it'll be a nice way to jog your memory of, oh, that's 3 times 2,000. So I find myself using, in internal documents, using that a lot, in addition to notes on the side, but it's good to have those individual amounts captured. So then again, with individual cell references, so that's, we saw that as well. It's just a matter of, like bingo, looking at the column and the row to see what the letter and number are, and then typing that in. And then with cell ranges, if you just have the range, it's not going to know what to do with it. There's a million different operations you can slap onto a range, but the easy common one is sum, and that's just going to add up whatever range you enter into there. However, if you don't have to always be typing this whole thing out. Say we want to add D3 through D5. We're starting from scratch. We can hit equals, sum, opening bracket. Oh, and with the ranges, we always need brackets around our range. So once we have the opening bracket, we can just highlight which cells we want to add up, put on our closing bracket, and hit enter. Even better, once you have a formula in one column, if you copy that cell and go to, say, the one right beside it, you want to do the same thing, but in column E. I'm just going to delete what was there. So we've copied this cell. If we click on E6 and paste, it's going to create a parallel formula. So not just, it's not going to make an identical D3 through D5. It's going to create a sum for E3 through E5. So that'll save you typing up the same formula over and over and over again. It will always create a parallel formula and sort of match it. Another thing to note about copying and pasting in Excel is you'll notice these dotted lines around, around the cell that I've copied. It's going to remain, that indicates that it's on the clipboard, and it's going to remain that way until I click on another cell and start to enter items into that. And then it will be removed from the clipboard. So now if I wanted to paste that, oh, actually that's another difference in this version. So some versions, once you start typing in another cell, it'll actually forget completely the cell that you had on your clipboard. That's in most of the Mac versions that I've used, that's how it's worked. So I'm learning some things today too. There's something else I was going to mention about those formulas. Oh yes, the other thing you can do is you can have a formula that will refer to items on another worksheet. Now your worksheets, you'll notice I've got several different tabs along the bottom here. A number of sheets in one workbook. I can actually add another sheet and link it to that one so that it actually spits out numbers from that linked sheet. So I'm going to show you an example. So I've got a new sheet here, and say I want, say my board wants a fundraising report. And I just want to isolate those numbers so that it's easier for them to know what they're looking at. We don't have to sift through the whole thing. We can look at something in isolation. So say we want fundraising. I'm going to, in my new sheet, I'm going to start off hitting an equals sign and then clicking on the tab that I want it to refer to. Now you'll notice right away in my formula builder, it has inserted a reference for what sheet it's referring to. Budget with its exclamation mark, that's an Excel syntax way it wants to spell it. If it doesn't have the exclamation mark, it does not compute. And say I want it to show me this amount on the next page. So now you'll see in the formula builder it says equals, and then the sheet reference, and then the cell reference. It's going to tell me C8. Then I hit enter, and I'm back to my new spreadsheet, or my new sheet that I had created, and it is now spitting out that number. However, it's not immediately obvious what that number refers to. So what we can do is, I'm just going to insert a new row here. What we can do, we'll start again by creating a formula, hitting equals. We're going to go back to this budget tab, and we're going to have it equal this description. So I've clicked B8, and now if I hit enter, it actually spits out the text. So formulas can help you manipulate text as well as numbers. Obviously, it can't add up words, but it can spit them out in a way. So for now, for example, if I change what this is called to just yay on my new sheet, that changes as well. So it helps you. It saves you updating multiple sheets. You can have a master sheet, budget, that, and then a smaller sheet that looks at something in isolation and just refers back to your master sheet. and will automatically update. Now the great thing about, now remember, if you're setting something like this up for yourself, remember that you can copy a formula and paste it, and it's going to create a parallel. So if you've got ones that, luckily for me in this one, all my fundraising items are in a row. So if I want to just copy it, I can copy both of these cells and just paste them over and over and over again until I've got all the ones that I know. I've got up to fundraising total. I've got all the ones that I know my board is interested in. I'm going to get rid of that last one. So I'm going to just pause while I'm doing this, because if I highlight a section and just hit delete, it actually only deletes information out of the one cell. But if you right click, there's an item called clear contents, and that will actually erase from a whole area that you've selected. Feel free to stop me if I'm going too fast, or if I've glazed over something that you find interesting, or if there's something that you're like aren't understanding what I'm doing. If I'm doing something too fast, just let me know. So that's one way of doing that. Another feature that I absolutely love is autofill. So say I want to number each of these items, but I've got 1 million, and it's going to take me forever to go 1, 2, 3, because the first item isn't on the first line, and maybe I'm skipping some of them. 4. So what I can do is, once I've got the first few done, there's this little tiny button in the corner, and when I hover over it, it gives me a black crosshairs. If you click on that and drag it down, it's going to figure out what pattern you're using and just autofill according to that pattern. So I find that really, really helpful. It'll work with dates, numbers, anywhere it can recognize a pattern. It doesn't have to be counting by ones. If you go 2, 4, 6, it should be able to figure out what you're doing and count by 2s. So that can save you a lot of time, yeah, with filling something in over and over and over again. That'll really help you out. Now again, I'm going to clear contents. A few other formatting items that are kind of the formatting I find can be the cause of the most headaches, but there are a few tricks, ways around it to make your life easier. The most common hang up is this item here. Under your home menu, there's a little field that shows your number format. I apologize if it's very small. So generally, most of your cells will start off as general. And that will just take what you type in and show it as you type it in. However, something like this cell here, you can see it has a custom number format. So what that does is it will automatically put a $sign, it'll put in your decimals on a certain place, and it'll show you a certain number of decimal places. When we're dealing with currency, we generally want 2 decimal places and not 4. We're not doing any super accurate calculations or measurements that we need to 4 decimal places. We just need dollars and cents. It will also, the biggest headache I find is when it thinks you're typing in a date. So say I'm typing in an address and their address is 31-2-2002. So now, I think it's okay on this, in this case. But if I type in the word January, if I type in an actual date, actually, let's do that. January 1st, 2018. It's going to come sooner than we know. I'm going to talk about this error message in a minute too, because it has automatically formatted it that way for us. So if you don't like how that looks, your best bet is to go into your number formats, and you can force it back to a long date, and it'll give you a preview of what it's actually going to show up as. When you switch between dates and actual numbers, it gets real messy really fast, and it'll actually, the numbers change and make no sense to me. I'm sure they actually do make sense, but if I change this January 1st, 2018 to an accounting format, it gives me 43,000. And so basically, just that's a great troubleshooting area that's going to it can cause a lot of problems, and it's an easy fix. Once you know it's there, it's just changing the formatting. Now is a good time to talk about this. When you have a number that is longer than your actual cell, it's going to show up as these number signs. So all you're going to want to do is resize your column. Really easy fix. And you do that by just going to the edge of the column and dragging it wider and wider until it all fits. You can, okay, sorry. Another really helpful tool for that kind of problem is and any kind of formatting error when you can't figure out how to get something formatted the same as something else. And this applies to Word as well, is the format painter. I love the format painter. So say I cannot figure out how this person got this certain font and this certain line underneath the cell. I can highlight the cell that I like, hit the format painter, which is basically like dipping your paintbrush into that cell and using it as paint, and then you just brush it across wherever you want it to go. So it's not the prettiest, but you get the idea of how you can really format something really quick without even knowing where the person found the formatting. If you were dealing with someone else's spreadsheet, you don't know where they formatted, where they found that strike through option if you want to get rid of something that you don't like, and it's also good for that. So I can highlight those, dip my format painting paintbrush, highlight, and then it's a cure for most problems. I'm going to do that a little bit more here, just to get us back to basic. Format painter, paint it in. The other thing I want to mention, we talked a little bit about pulling out just a few numbers if someone's requesting just a small section of your budget. Another great thing to do in certain reports, before, say you're going to export it as a PDF and you only need your totals, but you don't want to delete rows because you're going to need that information later. And also, if I delete these rows that are using a formula, it's not going to know what hit it. And so for example, say I don't need to see these rows in my report. Say I delete them. Now my spreadsheet doesn't know the numbers. The reference cells have disappeared. It's going to give me an error message, ref. It doesn't know what I'm talking about anymore. And at the very bottom, oh, I didn't do a grand total. It's also going to cause problems further down if I've done a grand total where I total up the artistic, fundraising, etc. It's going to give me error messages at the bottom. So if you can avoid it, it's best not to delete rows. If you are not super familiar with what you're doing and you aren't sure where all the formulas are, it's better not to delete rows. I'm just going to hit undo. But an easy thing you can do is just right click on the side and hit hide. Essentially what that does is it takes it as if it was a paper and folds it accordion behind your visible rows. So the data is still there, it's still available to you, and if you look on the side and the numbers, you can see it goes 1, 2, and then jumps to 6. So you can tell that there are rows hidden there. And in this version, we also have a line. In other Mac versions, these numbers turn blue to show you that rows are hidden. You can do the same thing with columns. Say say you have a number of years, but someone is not interested in, they just want to know your projected budget. You can hit hide, and automatically you've got a much cleaner report, but all your information, your expanded spreadsheet is still all there. It's just hidden. Now to get it back, all you want to do is, so you see where it jumps from B to E. You can simply highlight those two bordering column references at the top, the letters at the top. Right click, and right after where you see it saying hide, there is unhide. So automatically those are back. If you're not sure where all of what's hidden in a spreadsheet and you just want to play it safe, you can click the select all button in the corner, this one with the triangle, and then right click unhide, and it's going to get everything. Even if there's a column way off to the side here somewhere that was hidden, it'll catch that. That's especially helpful if you get a real big spreadsheet. It can be hard to capture everything. So if you just select everything and hit unhide, that will help you a lot. How are we doing for time here? Got
half an hour left.
Great, okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about printing, and this is also something that's going to be a little different between Mac and PC. But just to let you know what these options are and what they're called so that you can always look them up. Big problem with spreadsheets is they're often too big for 8.5 by 11 paper, and you print them off and you've got pages and pages and pages going across, and to make any sense, you'd have to line them all up and tape them together to make it make any sense. So, but there are a few options that will really help make printing less of a headache for a report. So the first thing is scaling. On this version of Windows, we've got a scaling option right in the menu. On Mac, it's going to look more like this, which is under page setup on this computer. And if you afterwards, Sharon, if you want me to show you where it might be on yours, we can do that. But most of the options are in page setup in this version on Windows. So the one I use the most often is this scaling. And even more so than percentage, I use the fit to. We often have in our minds how many pages we want it to end up on, what we think we can handle in terms of width and how many pages we want to use up. If we have a spreadsheet that's printing on 6 pages and then has 1 line on a 7th page, and it's going to use up another page and just going to be kind of annoying to read, you can force it to just scale it down a little bit by dictating how many pages wide and how many pages tall it's going to print on. I have found, and so on my version, it gives me a preview as I change these numbers. I have found it will, if I set it to 1 page wide, sometimes it shrinks it down way too small. If that's the case, I sometimes just bump it up to 2, and it'll often still be on 1 page wide, but bigger. So that's, I'm not exactly sure why that is. Someone else on the internet probably can explain it better, but that's something to try. Just try fiddling around with those, especially if it's giving you a preview. You can fiddle with those numbers until it's in a way that is going to be manageable for you. And again, changing from portrait to landscape can be really helpful so that you can get all of your columns side by side. However, if you can't, a really helpful set of settings is under this sheet option. So here it has rows to repeat at top and columns to repeat at left. This is so helpful if you're on multiple pages. So if I set, so it's going to be a little bit tiny on here, but I'll just show you with my cursor. In this example, I've got these headings at the top. If I'm on 6 pages, we may forget which of these columns is the approved budget, which is the projected budget by the time we get to the end of the document. So we can actually set it to repeat certain rows just by filling in this option here. Not print titles. I'm not exactly sure why it's not letting me do it.
You might have to go back into the original sheet.
Okay. Oh yeah. So I'm going to access this a different way here. Okay, here's the other way in, is under print page layout, when you're just in your document, before you've even hit print, there's this print titles option. And here you can enter rows to repeat at top. These work at the same as your formula builder, so you can actually click the reference and not worry about typing it in the way, because as you can see, when I clicked on 1 so that it selected the whole row, and it automatically entered it in this weird way with $ and a colon. But if I just click where I want to go, I don't have to worry about the Excel syntax and how it wants it all spelled out. I can just point. This is what I want to repeat at the top of my spreadsheet every time. You can do the same thing with columns. Say it's something that's going to print 2 pages wide, but we want to know what are we referring to by the time we get to that 2nd page wide. We can set it to, let's say we want column B to repeat at the left-hand side of each page. We can just click on the column reference, that B at the top, and it'll tell the program that column B is to print at the left-hand side of every page. And then there's a few other handy settings. Grid lines, if you want these, I'm just going to cancel that for now. These very light gray grid lines won't show up in your printing, but if you want them to, you can set them to do that. That's also in that window. Print area is another feature that I use a lot. It allows you to set an area to print, kind of like hiding our columns or rows, but just in the printing process. So if I know that really, say this category option is something that really only I use and it doesn't need to be printed out, I can highlight these columns and say I don't want these notes either. Maybe I've made a notes column for myself with just information that is too much information or more information than we're going to need for a certain purpose. You can highlight a certain area, then under layout, print area, and I apologize again, it's in a slightly different place in Mac. Print area, set print area, and that will show you which column, that'll set a certain area to print. Now, if you find your spreadsheet is not printing the whole thing, that's another place you might want to troubleshoot, is print area, clear print area. That can solve a lot of problems. It's another thing you can check if something's going wrong in the printing process. I'm just going to check my notes and see what else I really wanted to cover. But if there's anything in particular, if you have any burning questions. Oh, actually, before I do that, one thing that occurred to me is if you remember what any of these things are called, if you're writing notes, but you don't remember where they're found, you can always, in Mac, you can go to help, or here you can say, tell me what you want to do, and say I remember there's that thing called print area, but I don't remember where it's found. If I type it in the help or in this tell me what you want to do thing, it'll point you to, as long as you call it the right thing, as long as it can recognize what you're trying to tell it, it'll point you in the right direction. So that's a great way, if you, especially working between different versions, if things are in a different place or order, of just going to the help, it will save you time digging around trying to find things. Yeah, let me know if you have a burning question. I'm also just going to look at my notes and see if I can, what else I wanted to, I think we talked about this ref error. The value error we didn't talk about, but it's very similar. It's generally there's some sort of spelling error in your formula that Excel just doesn't like. So you'll want to try typing it in again. Another thing you might see often and have a bit of anxiety about, but it's really no big deal at all, is, and I'm not exactly sure how it might show up in the Windows version, but on the Mac version, there's often a little green triangle in the corner of a cell, and often a little yellow traffic sign. Those are all sorts of warnings, and often they are not that relevant. The most common one that is if there's cells that are just blank, that there are part of your addition. So it's adding 1, 2, 3, and then there's a blank cell, 4 or 5. It's just warning you that one of the cells that it's adding is blank. Generally, I don't care. It is helpful if you're combing through and trying to find an error like that, but generally these are things you probably can ignore, so they're generally not things that you need to stress about. Yeah, these 3 are very common things that might tell you are happening. An inconsistent formula, say if there's formulas side by side, one of them is adding the 3 previous cells, the other one's adding the 4 previous. It's going to give you a little warning, but generally, if you've done it on purpose, you won't care. Let me see what else I have here. Tables, charts, we're not going to go through. Yeah, we talked about formulas, formatting. Oh yeah, well, freeze pane and headers and footers we're going to go over too. Freeze panes I find is something that's quite helpful in a bigger spreadsheet just while you're working. And what it's going to do is, much like how we had a row that repeated at the top of our page when we printed it out, it's going to have a row that's not going to disappear when we scroll down. So to do that, we actually are going to click in the very first cell that we do want to move. And that can be either, and that's column and row. So if I click in this cell here, everything to the left of that cell is going to be frozen, and everything above that cell is going to be frozen. And I'll just show you what that looks like. However, I'm not sure where that is found in this version, so I'm just going to view. There we go. Okay. Freeze panes. It's also in help. Freeze panes. Keep rows and columns visible while the rest of the worksheet scrolls. That's the one I want. So you can choose, you see there's two other options, freeze top row and freeze first column, but I'm going to use this freeze panes option because I've selected B2. That's going to be my first moving cell. So we've done that. See if it works. Yes, that's scrolling like that, and that you can see my column A doesn't disappear when I scroll. That can be really, really, really helpful when you're just working on a spreadsheet on your desktop and you're getting dizzy from scrolling back and forth all the time. Yeah, so freeze panes, and the other one I said was headers and footers. Again, that kind of jumping back to printing, that is something that's helpful for printing. We think we can see everything here, but there's the added, when we print it out, there is you can add a header or footer that's not visible in this view. And you can add page numbers, anything you'd normally do in a Word document. So if we hit page layout, we're going to get a different view. Oh, but it's going to tell us we're going to lose our freeze panes, but we're okay with that. We know how to get them back. But we're going to look at the page view now. So in this view, you can add your header and footer. So you can add yourself a title. If you've got multiple spreadsheets, that'll be helpful for whoever you're reporting to know what this is referring to. In your footer, you can, if you double click, you'll enter into that. And you can add, oh, here's page number. It'll number the pages and say we want to know how many pages are in total. We're going to put of, and then we're going to hit number of pages. And maybe we also want the date and the time so that every time we print it, we know what version is this and when is this from, if we're printing out versions all the time and not filing right away, if we're going to file them away later. Yeah, so those are a few helpful things you can do. Once you go back into the normal view, those are going to be hidden to us. So that's another thing. If you're getting a header that you didn't intend, that's also how you would get rid of it, is going into that page layout view to see what's going on. Yeah.
So we have about 15 minutes.
Okay.
We did say we were going to cover pivot tables and if. You know.
Yeah, okay. So we'll do a little bit of pivot tables as well. Just to give us an introduction, I do have a couple links of some really good videos. It's not something, it's, in my experience, it's taken me a longer period of time to explain pivot tables, but just to sort of show you what they do, and then in case you want to do a bit more research on them, just knowing that they exist and what they are will be helpful. So similar to what we did with creating this separate sheet that referred to another sheet, pivot tables also do that, but they also will do the added layer of summarizing our data. Because I have this, that's going to come into this column where I have categories going to come into play. Because what we're going to end up with once I do this pivot table is it's going to summarize based on unique values in this column. So I'm going to have, once I'm finished, I'm going to have a table that has listed down the side artist fees, hospitality, office supplies, fundraising, capital, and office supplies. Again, it won't repeat it, it'll summarize them up. So without any further ado about that, I'm going to just show you quickly what can happen with a pivot table. So go under data and pivot tables again. Apologize, I'm pivot chart in this version. So first step is to highlight everything that you want to include. It's going to summarize our data. So anything that you could possibly want to include, you're going to highlight it. Every column needs to have a heading in it. It's going to not like you very much if you're including blank columns, or a lot of accounting software will spit out blank columns in between columns. So you can delete those or give them a name like 1, 2, 3. You just need to put something in that first row because it's going to use those. We'll see a little bit later on what that's going to do. So because I highlighted this area, columns A through E, before I hit pivot table, it's already thrown that into our range. So that's the area that it's going to refer to in our pivot table. And I'm going to put it into a whole new worksheet. That's the second part here. So we hit OK, and then it gives us a whole new worksheet. You can rename it by right-clicking on it. And it gives us this, at first it may look scary, builder. Now, what you will recognize is here are our column headings. So basically it's going to, I'll show you an example and then we'll work backwards from there. So remember we talked about that category column had everything sort of had a category. If we take that and just drag it into Axis, in Mac versions that's called rows, which I think is a little more user-friendly than Axis. Legend is called columns. So you can see as soon as we dragged category into the axis, it gave me row labels. So this shows me every single unique value that showed up in my budget, in my categories and budget. It's got them listed. So right away, we can see all the options, everything that was listed in there, it's listed just once as a unique value. Then if we want, so say we want to see the total amount spent on anything that I've categorized as artist fees or fundraising or hospitality, all I need to do is take the column, one of the columns that I know contains those numbers, and drag it into the values. And in this version, it has defaulted to sum. I've also experienced versions which default to count. So the difference between those, and this is actually different too, it's created a chart for me automatically, which I'm going to ignore for today. It's automatically any row in that year-to-date column where it's had an amount, it's going to add them all up. So that's yeah, it can be tricky depending on what you're doing to get it to spit things out the right way. It may take a few tries, especially if you're getting it defaulting to counting. What that does is, say there are three separate cells that have artist fees in them. If it's defaulting to count, it's going to add up to 3, which doesn't tell you how much money you spent on it. It just tells me how many lines in my budget refer to artist fees. The way you change that is over here. If you hit this little drop down, you've got value field settings. And so you can see sum is at the top. You can switch it to count. You can switch it to average, which may be useful sometimes, or min or max, maybe it'll be useful. But for the most part, I'm generally just trying to add it all up. And sometimes count can be helpful, but we'll just see how that looks. If I change it, so now you can see it refers to how many entries in my spreadsheet it has. It's not as useful as, for a budget, as useful as adding everything up, which is usually what we want to do. The tricky thing about pivot tables is you can't really edit inside of them. If I try to type in something in it, it's gonna block me. It's a pivot table. It's summarizing data from a master source. It's not something you can manipulate from the inside. You really have to go through the settings on the right-hand side to get it to spit out data you've put in your master sheet where it's referring to. So that's just a basics of what a pivot table is and can do. You can make really complicated pivot tables, and I find them very fun. And they can they also will update at a click of a button, so you don't have to constantly be preparing separate documents with separate information, repeating the same information on a separate document, but just an added sheet that refers to the same information that may have been updated since the last time you needed it.
So Chantel, would this be especially helpful if a funder only wants to see certain reports and you don't want to have to do the work all over again?
Yeah, so say you have a foundation that has funded a certain project, like a capital project. You can filter it to just show one category. So you can select all, unselect all. Say somebody funded our capital campaign, but maybe we need a little more data than just the grand total. We have this description column. We can add that in. This always takes a little moving around. Does this work? Yeah. So now we've added another layer into the rows. Now it shows me the detail of every unique value that falls under capital. So I've got a little report on all of our capital spending right there.
That's magic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wait.
Cheryl.
So I'm just thinking that, so for our clients who are regularly having to report, say, to CADAC.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And CADAC has its own categories.
Yeah.
And it's notorious for things like, it wants separated out things like rent from your admin costs, right? So let's say, for example, so if they're reporting CADAC, these are all my admin costs, but from that total, I have to subtract out the rent, I have to subtract out professional fees. So if we had their year-end numbers in the spreadsheet, and we created an extra column on the side as a category, and we label them according to what, say, CAD wants, we could create a pivot table, and then it would have the admin would pull out all the things except the things that we have on the state. Right.
Yeah, you can filter that out. Like I said before, it can be difficult when it's getting spit out of accounting software because of those extra columns.
We have to remove all those extras, and I guess we have to make sure that our source data is full.
Yeah, and you have to make sure that your source data, like you can't call it capital and capital campaign because those are two different spellings of the same thing. So there's a few things to keep in mind, but it could, yeah, that's the short answer. Yeah.
We have 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see. Any other questions? Yeah, Cheryl? Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
So when we're talking about the formatting drop-down menu,
oh yeah,
and you can toggle between like general. Is there a way to set up your Excel so that, like in preferences or something, so that when you open a new sheet, you're always going to get the same? Like if you're always constantly having the same formatting for every sheet that you can use, there are ways to set your preferences so that it's like, well, my numbers are always going to be in the accounting numbers, unless I go and actually change or
right.
Things like that. I'm just wondering.
A couple suggestions, and there may be a way to do that that I don't know about. One thing you can do, you can apply those number formats to a whole sheet just by clicking that that select all. So if we go back to, let's see, so now I've forgotten where we were. File, nope. I think it's just under home. Momentary lapse here. If you've whatever you have highlighted, you can just apply to. Pivot table is not the greatest place to demonstrate that. So say we've got everything highlighted. Say we want to change it to currency. It just does it. It knows it can't put a $sign in front of my text, so it's just automatically done it. But maybe I like the accounting look better than the currency. You can just apply it to the whole document. You can also save a template. So if you create a document, like just the bare bones of a document, you can save it as a template. So that when you open it up, it'll come up under my templates as a template you can use. You just have to go File, Save As, and instead of a workbook, you should be able to save it as a template. You see it? It's so small on mine. You can see it better than I can. But how far down is it? Oh, there. Yeah, there it is. So you can save it as a template, and then it will bring it up under my templates of something you can use. You can do that in Word documents as well, and I've done that with like a letterhead, so that I can bring up a digital letterhead that I've customized. It's not, so that it'll bring it up when you're ready to start a new document. Yeah.
Okay, well, at this point, we're going to have to end for today, and thank everyone for attending. And encourage you to contact Creative Manitoba if you would like some further one-on-one coaching sessions with Chantel Mierau. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Okay, so we'll just click end meeting now. Stop sharing.
Oh. Yeah, if you know where it is.
Just find out.
Here, it says recording if we hit stop.